Good afternoon, all. Let me start by saying thank you and welcome for those who are attending our webinar today. I'm Nazira, co-founder and the president of Vendorship Inc. Thank you to our speakers, Danny Royer and Dr. Dinesh Chauhan, for joining us today. The topic is Agtech, efficient farming. We hope that our discussion will contribute to constructive thoughts and processes for you to think how to take next steps if you're planning to become an entrepreneur, or especially an ag tech entrepreneur. Thank you to our team, Anu, who's in the back end, who's helping, and the post that you're receiving is from Anu, so thank you. We have our other team members join as well, and thank you to the whole team for making our weekly webinars happen, Sabina, Madhu, Manju, and Susan, so thank you so much. So to introduce our speakers today, Dr. Dinesh is joining from New Delhi, and it's probably 12:30 in the night for him. So thank you, Dr. Dinesh, for taking the time and having the confidence to join us today. You are the director of Indigram Group, and you're also an eminent keynote speaker and have been a long-term exposure to agriculture and agri-businesses in Africa, across Asia, and you help with developing several entrepreneurs as well in the ag tech industry. So thank you for joining us. We have Danny Royer. Danny, we love the logo on your t-shirt. Of course, you are the co-founder and the COO and the Chief Systems Officer for Growers Insight. And what you do is exactly what our topic today is. How do you bridge that gap between technology providers and technology consumers in the agriculture business industry? So before we head to our real talk today on ag tech, the question I have for you is, Danny, let's start with you. So what is that one lesson or one skill that you learned during this lockdown period?
So I think the thing that I have learned is how to be a whole lot more patient with people that are new to doing webinars and Zoom meetings. The industry has a lot of people who, for the first time, are exposing themselves to these new technologies, and so it's required a significant amount of patience for me as I've gone into those meetings. So learning patience has been the key for me right now.
Patience is a virtue, as they say. So if COVID-19 is teaching you that, keep it well going, Danny. And Dr. Dinesh, how about you? What's that one skill or lesson that you learned during this COVID-19?
First of all, thank you, Nazira, for holding this session, and very good afternoon to all the viewers out there in US and all the listeners and viewers who are there in India. A very good morning to all of you. So it's 12:30 a.m. now here in India. And coming back to your question, post-COVID or during COVID, what is my learning? So as an individual, what I feel that this has made us understand that there may be scenarios which you have never expected and even dreamt of in your lifetime, and this has been a very challenging situation for each one of us in this world. We never felt and we never thought of that we can be so helpless in such a scenario, but then this has come up with a lot of opportunities. So every crisis gives you a lot of learnings and a lot of opportunities. So what we learned out from last 2 months of lockdown here in India, and what we have faced across the world, and talking to our colleagues, that this phase will also pass through, and then we learned newer ways to handle these kind of situations, and it made us more dependent, more efficient in handling things in lesser number of resources. So with limited resources, how you have to make up your life and how you have to keep the things moving on. So these are some of the things which we have learned, and probably we also came to know that we don't require so many of things to have a very peaceful life. So I think that it has been a great learning, and I think we have learned to work more efficiently without traveling. So this is another experience. We have become more productive also. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Dinesh, and that goes back to say a lot of opportunity for new entrepreneurs to bud out and realize what are the gaps that has been in the past 2 months. So very well said, and we wish you continued learning. So let's go back to our discussion today. Agriculture is the art and a science of cultivating soil, growing crops, and then even livestock, right? And technology is the skills, the tech, the methods, the processes. So where technology meets agriculture is our discussion. So Danny, my first question to you is, for those who are in the agtech industry or those who are planning to get into the agtech industry as an agriculturist or a technology person, how important is for those entrepreneurs to understand and be aware of the history, right, of the current status and the future of U.S. agriculture? Because we're in U.S., I'm talking about U.S. agriculture, the influence, the international trade, and even their own role within this global food agricultural economy. How important is it for a person to know all that?
So I think it's a great question. I think that there's been, in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of mistakes made because people haven't really done their due diligence. There's been a really, really poor job of market segmentation done by ag tech companies in general. You get a software company that thinks they're going to own every market segment around the world. And so just within the United States, irrigated land versus not irrigated land, leased land versus owned land, what are water rights? There's all of these nuances that go into an operation that dictate how they function and how they operate. And if you're bringing a solution to the table and you don't have a good idea, of some of those core functionalities, you're going to find yourself in filling the need of probably your first 2 or 3 people that adopt your technology. And that's going to very narrowly scope what you're doing, which could be fine. It could be a large enough piece of or segment in the market that you can build a business. But a lot of times what happens is people build their product for that one, those early adopters, and get stuck in a very small portion of market segment when, if they had a little bit broader perspective in the beginning, their products could have reached more segments. So after that, you got to understand how to segment the market.
So I'm assuming you're also mentioning even from the time way back, the policies that were set up for that. Is it important to know that as well? Like, why did corn become the staple in US? And so are those, how important are they? Because sometimes we brush off and we only like tunnel vision and tunnel thoughts and let's go do this, focus, then we forget cofactors.
I think it's really interesting that you bring the government piece up, and because when you look at building any business, you have to look at what factors you have to play, and regulations is one of them. And within agriculture in the United States specifically, but even as I'm venturing my business into South America there's a lot of segmentation just in regulations. So in California, if you want to create a chemical product, you have the US EPA that you have to go through. But then once you get through the United States Environmental Protection Agency, California has its own EPA, and we have higher VOC requirements for all of our formulated chemicals that are used in agriculture. So if you're in the biotech space or you're trying to create some sort of technology that's chemical based and going to require some sort of regulatory approval, you better understand that California is its own unique market. Washington and Oregon are close behind. New York is another state where there's a lot more things happening. So being aware of what type of regulations exist is also important. And I would say the other really big important thing to be thinking about is water rights, especially when you get into specialty crops and you get into the Western US. Water rights are changing pretty dramatically right now, and water availability is changing. And so when you're looking at qualifying a lead and looking, especially if you're in that space where they're irrigating, you're going to want to make sure that you understand the regulatory environment around water. Are they going to have water in 10 years? In California, we're just starting to regulate groundwater for the first time. There's a lot of implications for that. So absolutely being aware of the regulatory environment is super key. And to hit on your corn thing, the commodities have been subsidized in the United States for a long time, and could have a whole discussion about whether that's necessary and what the implications are of that. But there's been a lot of businesses that have been built on, those subsidies and those commodities. So there's a lot of opportunity when you start looking at where the dollars from, especially in the U.S., the federal government are going.
Definitely, great answer, Danny. Dr. Dinesh, before we joined this webinar, we were briefly discussing of how we don't have to be an expert on the field. My background was practicing medicine way back in India, and today I'm talking to you all about ag tech. It shows that sometimes our boundaries doesn't have to be confined. So my question to you is, I'm sure even Lyft and Uber founders or co-founders were not have to be either in agriculture or technology, and what entails an ag tech ecosystem, and are we only discussing ag tech, or the farmers discussing ag tech, or is it just being discussed in the startup community? My question.
You see, what I understood from you is that you want to understand that whether to enter into Agtech field, whether anyone has to have specialization in agriculture or he has to have full understanding of that. No doubt, if you have an understanding of agriculture and agriculture sciences, it will help you. But there is a bigger question behind this, that you are here to solve issue, and probably it is not important that how it will be solved, but it is important that you know that there is a need and there is a certain problem which has to be addressed. And if you are able to identify the right problem, and then probably you can identify the right kind of solution which actually you want to provide to your farmer. Here in this case of Agtech, it will be farming community or a processor or an industry. So it is important to understand the need, and then it is not very much important that you have to be purely from agriculture background. If you go and see a lot of successful startup companies and founders, and if you see their qualification, so probably they might not be purely agri science graduate or even in any other field as well. So but then they came out with an innovative way and innovative approach. And sometimes I am a strong believer that sometimes you get solution for that particular field which is not in that industry. So maybe we can get solution from automotive industry for agriculture, and maybe we can get a solution in supply chain from some other industry. So typically we can get solution from space sciences as well for our some inbuilt agricultural problem. So what I advise to most of my startups and founders who come to me, that try to find out solution outside your industry and sector, and you may find some innovative solution which is not within your industry. Why? Because if it was already there, somebody would have already done it. So if you want to come up with something innovative, you can find it anywhere. So it's not very important, but definitely over a period of time it helps to have an understanding of it.
Very good. Thank you so much. So, Danny, what or who inspired you to start a career in agriculture, right? Even from your childhood. But the question to it is also that what has happened to the agriculture prices in the last century? You mentioned a little bit, but you didn't talk about the details of whether it's increased or decreased the scope. And what are some of the biggest challenges in agriculture today?
So I think when you look at pricing and you talk about pricing, especially at the farm gate, so when I say farm gate, the pricing to the grower, what's really happened over the last 40 years, and really you could tie it back even into post-World War II, is consumers have demanded cheap food and they want it now. And how we've built our supply chain to do that is by really centralizing the second or third touch in the supply chain. So we centralized, excuse me, sorry about that. We centralized packaging, we centralized processing, and what's happened there is also we've consolidated those businesses. So now you have, in specifically, you might have a half a dozen companies that are processing 80% of our domestic production of beef. And so when we talk about pricing, especially the farm gate, it's really dictated now. Growers have no control of their pricing, and that's just the reality of where we are. And I would say that there's, depending on what cropping systems you're in, profitability for farmers is just going down, and that's why the only way farmers that are continuing to be profitable are doing so is by scaling. And it's all about scale and efficiency. So pricing is reflective of consumer demand. I would say in the last 10 years, we're seeing a shift in what consumers want. You're seeing consumers who care a little bit more about how much people that are picking their produce get paid, consumers who care about the water efficiency, consumers who care about a carbon footprint. But you have the organic movement, the regenerative movement. So you're seeing some new types of movements coming through the supply chain that are very lucrative if you get in them and position yourself correctly. But still, the pricing, even in the organic sector and all those sectors, comes to the second touch. So really, for me, the challenge that the industry faces is in the middle, and it's getting consumers to understand that they've driven the situation we're in. Their habits, their behaviors have driven us, and they can quickly drive us in a different direction. But that's going to require some sacrifices on price. In the United States, we pay the least amount for food relatively than anywhere else in the world. And that's, yet I could go into a whole thing on food insecurity that exists in our country too. But the pricing mechanism that we have is, and I'm going to speak pretty candidly, we've monopolized processing in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying that we need to go build all these other processing facilities. There's a lot of efficiency in the existing infrastructure, but the ownership of that structure, we really should be looking at. I think technology has changed a lot, especially in creating transparency, that cooperative systems can be a lot more viable. In the 80s, cooperatives died and going into the 90s, because there was a lot of fraud going on. There was a lot of guys who were using money from the co-op to buy their own personal things. And today, because of different levels of transparency in financing or in accounting, we can mitigate those. So I see the need for a lot more cooperation between raw producers to come together and to be able to get more value out of the second and third touch in the supply chain. It's very hard to be a grower right now, and that's across specialty crops everywhere, and costs of inputs are going up everywhere. So I think, though, that from all of my experience, the only way to start getting more value as a grower, and frankly also driving more value and more connection to the consumer, is growers have to start being more cooperative and getting more engaged in the second and third mile of the supply chain, and not just ending at the farm gate.
Very, very well said. And of course, the county that I used to work in was under the University of Georgia Extension Corp. And they used to offer a lot of services, including how to grow your own garden in the backyard. So yes, the accounting really helps in those sectors, Danny. So thank you for bringing that up. So Dr. Dinesh, let's talk about the technology, right? So the cloud computing, Amazon Web Services has made it so easy and affordable to store data. But ultimately, we're talking about not just storing the data, we're talking about incorporating agriculture into it. So how does one learn about the new innovation that's available there? Or how does one even start thinking about what am I solving, or why am I solving this in the agriculture business, right? So the risks versus benefits for the consumers, will it bring profitability? My question to you is, what does technology do to agriculture production?
So according to me, technology has very important role in agriculture production, and what we see that we have been doing a lot of research, and it's not only the today's IT and data science, which we will call technology as such, but there is a huge array of various fields in agriculture, which is all based upon technology. So whether we talk about agronomy, whether we talk about plant breeding, whether we talk about biotechnology, whether we talk about genetics, so food technology, so everything falls in place, and everything is a part of technology. And technology has plays a very important role now. Why? Because you see, currently we are targeting to feed a population of roughly around 9 billion by 2050, and if we have to feed this kind of population, the kind of growth which we are witnessing now, and the rate at which our production is going up, will not be able to fulfill. So probably we have to double our food production in coming time. So it's not possible purely by the current technology or current methods. So we have to see that how we can improve our productivity, and probably we don't have much of a land left to increase this productivity. If we see last 50 years, the growth has come by utilizing new land for production. So it was roughly around like 70% of our production came in by by this adoption of new land, which will not be available moving forward. So this technology will play a very important role, and with the new development in data science and AI, and then artificial intelligence, robotics, and all those kind of latest technologies, probably this will play a very critical role in understanding or making a farmer understand more effectively about his field and what is happening in his field, how he can improve the productivity, and then it has to be done in a sustainable manner. And coming with the new changes and climate change, probably doing agriculture in a sustainable manner, I don't see that without the help of technology it is going to happen. So technology is going to play much more role than which it has done in the past.
And that's a perfect segue for the next question for Danny. And Danny, you missed the previous question answering who or what inspired you to get into the agriculture business. But adding to that question is continuing what Dr. Dinesh said, right? So the traditional ag industry that you talked about is really going back on consolidated services or cutbacks, right? So it might be when you see that, that means there's a void and new a forum or a platform for entrepreneurs to bud, right? But is this the right time, and why now? And Dr. Dinesh talked a little bit about the technology, but why now with cutting edge technologies in the ag tech industry? Why now? And how do you differentiate what Growers Insight does? How are you competitive compared with others?
So I'll go back to that, answer your first question on what inspired me. There was a commodity salesman for Foster Farms, which is a large poultry producer in the West Coast. And he got me into raising dairy replacement heifers when I was in 4th grade. I went to a soccer camp at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is a good engineering school and ag school on the West Coast in California. And that is what started my path. So his name's Frank Fagundes, great guy, still know him today, with his daughters. But that was the person when I was in 3rd or 4th grade that kind of kicked me in the butt and said, hey, you should get into this. Now, going into what differentiates Growers Insight, Growers Insight does something that no one wants to do. I found this void, and we started the company based on me being a agriculture producer. I was the VP of technology for a 12,000 acre farm that was growing 18 different crops. And I could find technologies that could do what I need, but they didn't have support. The startups they were either a startup or they were a company that just didn't understand the needs of the industry. So there wasn't implementation support, there wasn't integration support, and then there was very little strategy talked about when we talk about technology on farm. So that's what we do at Growers Insight. We have an audit process. It starts with the free survey online. From that audit, we help put together a 3 to 5 year technology strategy. And then that strategy is then translated into implementation projects. And we actually provide, through our audit, implementation plans at a pretty high level. But then we also jump into implementation services. And the implementation services vary from, I have clients that I'm just coaching, like they have an ag tech, executive, or they have somebody who's doing data, somebody's doing technology for their organization, and they just need a coach. So I do coaching, and then we also have full-on implementation services where you've chosen a software and you want to implement it. Well, we'll come in and we'll do the entire implementation. And we are looking at doing some interesting new things coming in the future as in reselling technology and providing the support versus the software developer directly. So our biggest differentiator, though, is that we're doing the work, and I didn't want to do this when we started the company. I just wanted to provide the audit services and strategy, but every engagement we have has resulted in an implementation project. And as we've looked at our referral arrangements that we have with the providers that we work with, implementation is just what everybody needs. They need support and they need experience. And that's what we do.
Is this the perfect time or a good time for new entrepreneurs to get into ag tech?
I'm going to say that it depends on your financial stability. If you can survive 6 months right now to a year without any income, and you have an idea that could gain some traction, it's a good time, but sales cycles are really long. I have clients that I got really lucky that in my last job, I got to establish some relationships and basically roll from my job into having clients. But I have clients that I've started a year ago that are just now coming on board. So the sales cycle can be really long. So you need to make sure that you as an individual have the cash flow to survive for, I would say, at least a year before you want to make that plunge, because it's just a slow sales cycle.
Got it, and good advice indeed. Thank you, Danny. Dr. Dinesh, so Danny just talked about data, he talked about audits and statements. Does this actually make sense to an agriculturist or a farmer, right? Because always data and technology might not be the answer for him. For a farmer, it's am I getting the ROI if I spend this money on this? So my question is, where is the opportunity for tech in the farmers, because they are the consumers of this technology, and how do they go about it deciding?
You see, as far as my experience goes, and I have been interacting with farmers all across the world, and both in India, Africa, primarily, and the Middle East as well as. So what I have experienced that farmer has no affinity for technology directly. It's his only motive is to improve the profitability, and maybe we as a tech guy or we as an Agtech company, we are trying to solve a lot of problems, but we have to understand what is the core issue. So in India, if I talk about, and if we have also observed and spoken to a lot of farmers, and we keep on witnessing some of the major concern of farming community here in this part of the world is connecting to the market. So probably we have a lot of produce, we don't have buyers for them. We have a lot of buyers, we don't have produce for them. So there is a total mismatch in allocation of produce. So it's not that we are not having food grains, or we don't have enough of fruits or vegetables. What we are seeing that one part of the world we have plenty of tomatoes, and other part of the world is struggling to buy tomatoes. So why it is happening? So technology has to play a very critical role here. How to connect these markets, how to connect these growers, how to get them the right price, and what should be the mapping of the production, whether can we have a platform where we can get the data, where farmer can decide which crop to grow, and on the basis of weather forecast, on the basis of other data parameters, can we come to a conclusion that this crop we have to grow and this many acreages are required, and there is probably there is a huge opportunity in this area in connecting the market and utilizing the data, availability of right kind of data. So what is happening is like we have so much of data, but where are what the data in which form is required by the farmer, that is missing. So we have to make the things much more simpler for him to understand. He has no interest in what is precision farming. His only concern is, can you improve my per kg productivity or profitability? If that is possible, he is ready to go in for any kind of technology. So we have to understand as a startup, as an entrepreneur, as an input marketeer, whosoever we are, whether we are processor, how to improve his profitability, and as a government as well. So this is my advice.
Very well said. As they say, build and they will come, which doesn't work anymore, even from the time that I used to work in the county. So we said, no, they're not going to come. You have to build it along with them. So, Danny, my next question. Yes, go ahead.
I want to go in and chime in on that, because one of the things that we've done at Growers Insight, I mentioned that free survey, and we've gotten enough responses now that question of what do growers want, at least what we're finding, and most of our surveys concentrated in the Western US. We do have some coming from Central and South America now. But there's an interesting correlation between age group and willingness to use technology, but not just willing to use technology to make money. So profitability gets talked a lot about, but what I'm recognizing in my generation, I'm a millennial, I'm only 35, is if you can make my life easier, and I can spend the same amount of money as I'm spending now, I'm really interested in that, especially when it comes to doing things remotely and remote irrigation, being able to monitor things remotely and track things remotely. The next generation wants to operate on their cell phone. So we're seeing a lot of interest in, I'm really interested in, I have documented in our surveys I'll spend the money if it makes my life easier. And so I think to build too on what Dr. Dinesh was saying is there's also that whole supply demand problem that exists here in the US too, very substantially. We waste a lot of food because of that issue where our supply chains aren't linked with our demand. And I think that in the next 3 to 5 years, one of the greatest areas of growth in ag tech is going to be in that marrying demand to supply. And I think that there's really good demand data out there. I think we actually have really good data, the Salesforces and some of the other technologies that are out there that can help us do demand projections are really good. What we don't have is good projections from our field operations. So getting the data, when did we plant? When were we supposed to plant? Getting that type of information married together with that next level of the supply chain so they can do their planning for processing or next steps and then have their sales projections and talk to their customers and let their customers know, hey, we're projecting to have in this week, 3 months out, we're projecting to have a surplus. Can we get a marketing campaign going now? So I think that Dr. Dinesh is dead on in that supply and demand marriage of those two systems or those two data sets is going to be really, really fun to watch over the next 3 to 5 years in ag because there's so much opportunity for improvement just in that space.
Sure. Thank you so much, Danny, for the additional thoughts. And so I know I asked you earlier, have you ever called yourself a farmer? And I'll ask you that question again. But my grandpa was a farmer, and then we moved to the city, and nobody is a farmer now as far as I know, but the land exists and they've given it to the other farming agencies to take care of it. But my bucket list is to be a farmer at some time and retire in a farmland. So I still have that hope of my retirement. But how does a farmer, Danny, decide on which commodity to grow? Is it generational passing, or he picks up and says, oh my gosh, there's a demand here, just like how entrepreneurs grow? Is that how farmers grow themselves?
That's a fantastic question. And in California, we're seeing a lot of cropping shifts and cropping cycle changes. My goal for me is I want to have 40 acres of pistachios that I have my house sitting in the middle of, and like 10 acres of pasture. I mean, that's where I want to end up. What's really driving your decisions? The first thing, if I do some consulting for farm managers or for people that are looking at investing in land. And the first thing is, what's your soil profile and what's your water capacity? So how much water can you get and what can your soil actually do? And from there, you're going to look at, okay, based on what I can plant, what's going to make the most money? Right now, permanent crops are really popular in California, but you have to have the capital and be able to get the financing to have no cash flow for 4 years. So that is a very hard space to get into unless you're well leveraged. For row crops, it's changing right now a lot. It's changing between profitability on an annual basis, and that's how we've always looked at it. We've always measured our accounting systems are all built for this crop this year made this much money, no matter how many acres. We just aggregate everything to the crop level. But what we're finding is that our rotations have a significant impact on outcome. So if I go grow 5 years of processing tomatoes in a row, you're just going to see that yield curve drop every year. But if in year 3 I threw in a corn crop, a grain corn crop, I'm not going to make any money growing that grain corn. You can't make money on corn in California. You just can't. But next year, I'm going to significantly increase the productivity of my processing tomato crop. Now, we don't have good enough data systems right now. And I've worked from very advanced, like some of the most top-notch farming organizations in the Western US, and the capacity to have that kind of analytics isn't there because we don't have the data structured correctly. So that's a lot of what I've done is help get growers, hey, but you need to get their data structured, you have to have 3 to 5 years of data to start finding those crop rotational opportunities. I just know from growing tomatoes for so long that corn makes a really great rotational crop. You're going to increase yield 10 tons by growing that rotational corn in. But how do you play that into your financial planning across your entire farm? It's really challenging. So that's another space that I think there's a lot of opportunity in, is crop planning, especially for your specialty row crop guys, your guys that are, when you look at leafy greens and people, we try to grow in my area of California one crop a year, maybe two. When you get over into the really leafy green specialty crop areas, they're trying to get, I think in Salinas, it's 3.2 crops a year. You go down to the Yuma Valley, and it's, again, they're shooting for over 3 rotations a year. So that's where, from a crop planning standpoint, there's a lot of opportunity. And right now you have systems like Famous that are trying to help, and it's all being done in Excel, and it's this hybrid of Excel combined with some sort of forecasting and sales system that food company or grower, packer, shipper is using. So another place for a ton of opportunity is crop planning.
Yes, I did read about precision farming that goes from the feed level to the plant level, and they tell you, when and what to grow based on the data. So I know there's a lot of innovative stuff that's going on if people are interested to get into it. But Dr. Dinesh, the questions I have for you are, how have farms differed in the past 100 years? 50 years, 20 years? Do you see less of farmland now? And do you see how it's being purchased or how it's being packaged? Basically, my question is, have you seen a change or development or invention that has made the biggest impact on you from the last many years to now?
You see, what if I talk about India, the farming for the last 50 years. So what we have observed here is that typically earlier what farmers were having is small piece of land, or we are typically, majority of the farmers here in India are small scale farmers, small land holdings and all, not around in acre or one not more than an hectare, most of the farmers. uh, what is happening is, like, with passage of time, these piece of land at an individual level are far again decreasing rather than increasing, right? So in the same family, what we have seen, that we have got one generation to next generation, this land is passed on to next generation, and probably we are getting lesser piece of land. And now the issue is, like, how to make this profitable. India has witnessed a cooperative revolution, and then probably we have brought in a lot of interventions, and in current government and past government as well. A new concept which I have seen has been evolved, and which is probably very successful now, and it is the concept of farmer producer organization, which we call as FPOs, or farmer producer cooperatives, FPCs. So what we have, government is spending a lot of money, and we are promoting this concept within farming community. So what we say that typically a group of, let's say, 100, a minimum of 100 farmers to 1,000 farmers come together, form a farmer producer company, and then there is a farming in a professional manner, where there is a CEO in that FPO, and they do a complete PNL, manage the PNL of that account, and do collective farming, and then connect it with the markets. So within our organization, we have one not-for-profit organization, ISAP, Indian Society of Agribusiness Professionals, and we have been promoting more than 200 plus FPOs in India. And some of these FPOs are pretty large, and they are very successful in doing the turnover. Probably they are very profitable as well. So we see a lot of opportunities, and farming has moved a long way in India. If I talk in last 50 years, and probably we see a lot of possibilities now in the area of FPOs, and then in area of corporate contract farming. And then probably we have also one of the good things which has happened post COVID or during this COVID era, is that a lot of regulations from government side, we have done away with it, because in this crisis we realized that it is becoming very difficult to operate the market yards. So earlier farmers were not having the facility to sell right to the processor, and this has been done away with APMC Act in most of the states where it was. And now the private players or processors, they can buy directly from the farmers, which was earlier has to come to the market yard. So we are seeing lot of initiatives from the government side as well to improve the farming. and it's a good sign. So we have seen a lot of changes in last 50 years in farming in India.
Sure. Thank you so much. Did you want to chime in there?
I would just say, from a land standpoint in the U.S., massive investments and consolidation, and mostly investments coming from the Middle East and Asia. So a lot of foreign investment in U.S. land.
Wow. Okay. So let's get to the other details about farming and farmers as well before we get to how can technology and farmers work together. So Danny, so the farmer knows that there are billions of dollars being pumped into the ag tech industry, right? And then he looks and he's like, oh my gosh, and I'm just making smallest of the margin. And we know, especially in India, in the past few years, we've heard of a lot of farmer committing suicide. I don't know the extent of that here in US, but I can imagine the mental stress that they have to go through because they get only a portion of what the consumers pay for the produce that they produce. So isn't it unfair for the farmers?
I think that kind of ties back into my answer on the first question, and in that we need to increase the value at the farm gate, and that's where I love the idea of the collective, and I think there needs to be a lot more collective bargaining and collective thought and action and purchasing happening between growers. But right now the culture is very competitive. I don't want my neighbor to know what I'm doing because I'm going to get a quarter ton more. I'm paying a 0.5 cent less for something, and they're very protective of their data. But for me, the opportunity is in their, when you start aggregating that data and you start collectively doing things, you become more powerful. And from a financing standpoint, from a buying standpoint, there's all of these things you can do. But it's the culture in the industry is very challenging, and it's a big hurdle that we're having to overcome. Yeah, I'm very clear where I with the generation cycle. When a new generation comes into play, we see all of a sudden now there's a new willingness to think differently and do things differently, but it takes that generational shift.
It does on many other fronts as well. So thank you for putting that millennial and the new generation thought into this. So Dr. Dinesh, and let's talk about an entrepreneur, right? And most of us, or all of us mostly who's listening to this, have been in that shape or some shape or form. And for entrepreneurship, you need a targeted customer base and to reach out to them and continue to make the sales. How does a technology person convince a farmer without even an MVP ready, right? So basically, the technology he needs to do the to make it happen, and for that he need a customer base. So are there anything in between that's helping them bring together? And I know Danny talked about it a bit, but Dr. Dinesh, what about your thoughts?
You see, yeah, this is an interesting question. Like for a technocrat to go and sell his product to a farmer, and why he is going to buy a solution from somebody who hasn't done farming in his whole life. And if somebody of that kind of technical guy and he goes and preaches a farmer, in fact, we have ourselves during our early stage of career, we witnessed that when we used to go to farmer and then he used to say, "Listen, guy." I have been doing farming for more than 3 generations, and now you are coming and telling me that this is a solution. If you will do this, your productivity will go high by, let's say, X percentage. So it's a challenge, but then probably what I feel that when you go and talk to the farmer, it's all like how much belief you have in your product. So if you have a belief and faith in your product and solution, that is very critical and important, and the farmer will believe you. I'm telling you here that farmer is very simple and very honest guy. And what has happened is like most of the time he has been not given the right solution, and he has witnessed so many companies and so many solution guys that still farmer is believing. So I think that farmer is the only person who will believe you initially. So let's give him the right solution, and he's the guy who is so loyal that if he believes and trusts you, and probably he's not going anywhere else once he starts using your solution. So my piece of advice for all young entrepreneurs is work closely with the farmer, work at the field, give them the right feedback, and don't tell them don't over promise them. You should under promise and over deliver. So if you do those kind of activities, working closely with the farmer, he's not going anywhere else. So and I have seen personally that if you work closely with the farmer, do a sample or demo in his field for one, and these guys are your two
That's
promoters or sales guy. So once you have a success story, you don't have to go to that block or village again. He is the person who will become your lifelong employee or marketing representative. So with whichever farmer you're working with, identify his need, find a solution, right solution for him, and give him a right piece of advice. If you're not ready with the right kind of solution, please don't advise him. And maybe come up with a right solution and then go back to that farmer. This is my piece of advice for all young entrepreneurs who haven't done farming themselves, but they have a right solution.
Very nice. Danny, I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah, I was just going to say something that I've seen for the companies that I'm exposed to in the Western U.S. that are being really successful. A lot of them have in their very early stages, found a grower or someone who has growing experience and brought them into the business, either made them a legitimate partner or hired them into a senior level position, and that instantly creates a lot of credibility. So there's some solutions that are doing very well in California right now because sitting somewhere in that C-suite is a grower, or there's a grower that's an investor partner. So those are, in California, those types of opportunities do exist. And I would actually advise, like if I was advising a startup, I'd say find your grower, give him his 2.5, 5, 10%, whatever he's going to require, and let him plug your stuff in and use it and validate it and then sell it for you.
Very good answer. Thank you. So let's talk about the government regulations, government policies, and also, of course, we want to touch base before the session, the international trade scope, right? So, and what's the outlook? So I know for US, the products that's being exported and the biggest buyers of US ag products are China, Mexico, and Canada. Is that still true, Danny? And is it going to change? Do you think new emerging markets are going to come up, especially during this COVID-19? Has anything changed? And I do want both of you to answer this question. What is the long run outlook for global agricultural markets?
So to answer the first question, I have no idea what's going to happen. I think that there's going to be a lot of shifts, though. I think combined with COVID, you also had our presidential administration going after China and coming up with new types of trade agreements that are going to significantly impact things. I'm starting a business in Argentina, and they're loving it because they're getting all sorts of new products going to China. So I think that your staple commodity crops are going to have a lot of shifting over the next 2 or 3 years. Long-term global markets are going to be dependent, I think, on domestic elections over the next 2 or 3 cycles. Is the globe going to go? Are we going to isolate ourselves as a globe and become much more tribalist, or are we going to move towards this newer world order where there's a lot more connectivity across the globe between nations and consumers and producers? I, of course, am hoping for the latter of the two, but I think our next 2 or 3 election cycles across the globe are going to really dictate what happens with those global markets.
Definitely, and I know you are an expert in the markets globally, especially in the Africa and the Asian region, Dr. Dinesh. And I see the slogans coming up: "Be American, buy American," or "Be Indian and buy Indian." And I'm somewhere in between. I'm like, what the sides can I do both? Right. So, Dr. Dinesh, can you tell us what's the outlook?
See, it's too early to comment, right? Because we don't know what is going to happen. And if you ask personally me, what is going to happen in the long-term perspective, in let's say 4 or 5 years down the line, no doubt that this pandemic has broken all this kind of supply chain and we were never prepared for these kind of scenarios, right? And it has coupled with a lot of other international bilateral relations which has happened across China, US, India, Japan. So there has lot of parallel things which are happening along with this pandemic. So it's total chaos everywhere, and supply chains are broken. Our government is saying that we will be focusing more on local, and let's be local, and we produce locally. And in fact, this is true also. We never realized that the for the success mantra was earlier to have a global supply chains, production in one part of the world and consumer in another part of the world. But then probably this pandemic has really raised a very big question, that do we require global supply chains, or we have to now be dependent more on locally produced things. So probably there has to be a balance between both the things for some year, and probably I'm sure we by that time we will get a solution, and this is just a phase which will pass on. So history has seen that we have faced pandemics earlier also. So this is a temporary phase. So let's not put so much of weight on this, and probably the world will remain same which it was before January 2020. So it is only a matter of time. Maybe it will take another 6-7 months. Yeah, but then there will be a lot of innovation and lot of development in technology to handle these kind of situations if they arise again in the future. So I see there will be a lot of solutions which has come up for these kind of situation which we were never prepared earlier. So most of these companies have now evolved and they are innovating. So we are getting a lot of new solutions, and we will keep on getting. And after every pandemic, the world has seen a new set of companies who will emerge. So I am sure that this pandemic is also going to give couple of new companies who will rule the world in next 50 years. So let's wait and watch.
Definitely a very safe answer indeed, Dr. Dinesh. So let's talk about two things, and then I will head to our question Q&A session for the next 4 minutes. So let's talk about environment and funding, right? And I know they don't really go together, but consumers are, social change. Green, climate and green environment and climate change, all these are going to be a continuous discussion, but maybe there's no immediate solutions. How is that impacting the environment that's become more, not in a positive way, but might be to an extent, we're not able to say it. How is that going to implement or affect ag tech industry, right? Are we going in the right direction with the technology? And of course, let's talk about funding. How is the funding for ag tech entrepreneurs currently? Basically, are the investors still willing to invest, not just COVID-19, but now and later?
Uh, for what I will say that the green in energy and the fundings of donor organization for not for profit and initiatives by various foundations across the world for a sustainable agriculture and promoting agriculture practices, putting more support donor agencies for greener environment and investing more in climate change initiatives for sustainably producing things. These things are very good, and probably it is going to happen. Only there has been a slight deviation in those investment portfolios because of this pandemic. So we have seen in India and other parts of the world as well that a lot of these allocations has moved slightly towards COVID-19 solutions. But then probably again, the part of it is again going to come back to livelihood programs or sustainability missions and all. So this is just a temporary phenomena, which probably will maybe in next 6 months time it will go away. Coming back to what is going to be the investment scenario in agtech companies post COVID, what I see that my piece of advice for all the startups is like have enough cash. As Danny was saying that for next 1 year you have to have a cash, and don't expect a lot of funding from your investors or VCs for next 1 year. Probably there will be investment, but VCs will be looking for more return for the amount of money which they are putting in, and they will be not looking for another round of investment. So probably this is my piece of advice for current time. We have seen still in this period there has been a lot of investment coming up in agtech. It's not like that everything has stopped in pandemic era, but most of these portfolios were actually into process in the month of January or February, and they were just at a closing round. So it was like that. But then most of the VCs will be more cautious, looking for returns, and then the startups have to work to find out they have to work more on the revenue generation part now, rather than focusing more on getting next round of funding. So probably they have to look for a quicker source of revenue generation, and they have to build a more sustainable model for next 1 year. That is my experience, or you can say my view, looking at the industry right now.
Danny, do you want to take up what are the VCs expecting at this time, and how?
My advice to any startup is don't take VC funding, because they're going to push you to sell your product too fast and you're going to fall on your face. That's what I've seen from most of the startups that are failing and that I've engaged with over the last few years. Their investors are telling them, you got to get money, push your product. It's not ready. And then they end up falling on their face. So I would not, if I was an ag tech startup, I would do everything I could to not take VC funding. They want to move at a much faster rate than the industry is ready for. So that's my 2 cents. And the other thing I would say in terms of watching other places, Australia, when we talk about environmental and we programs and we talk about carbon, Australia's had a carbon program for growers. It's in its infancy stages, but they just launched another type of conservation program that's really focused on growers using environmentally sustainable practices. So Australia as a government, I would be watching. When you talk about government support, I would be keeping an eye on their programs, because what's nice about their programs is they're direct to grower. So there's not a food company or there's not some other party involved in that grant process. It's just straight between the government and the growers. So just a place to keep an eye on.
Okay, before we head to the question, I do want your final comments for 20 seconds before we head to the Q&A session. So I know innovation, internal and external to the industry, may just be the solution, or but does it really matter if there are no more farmers left? Danny.
I think there's always going to be farmers. It's just what the farmer uses, the tools the farmer uses to manage his farm are going to be different, but there's always going to be a farmer.
How about you, Dr. Dinesh?
Yeah, I agree with Danny's view, and only the way of doing agriculture will change. And I am, as long as this earth is there and there are people on this earth, we will be having farmers on the field, right? So that is all.
Very nice. So I'm gonna, here's a question from one of the audience. So we'll take questions for the next 4 minutes, and then we can end our session. So this question comes from Senthil. It says, what are the technology tools, apps that can help today ag industry challenges? We talked about it, but we didn't specifically talk about an app or a tech. Danny?
So I can give some solutions that I think are in the right place. They have the right leadership. In irrigation, I think that WiseCon or Drop Control is, from an irrigation automation standpoint, a really interesting player to watch. They started in Chile, but they're now pretty spread out in the Western U.S. From farm management software standpoint, I think AgWorld, Conservice, and then FarmDog. Those are 3 systems that I've got exposure to that are all helping growers solve problems. The solution that I think is the one that I'm the most excited about and that I think is going to become more well known in the next 2 years is CropTrack. CropTrack's a fantastic tool if you're a food company and you have to allocate to lots of different growers and you need to track what's happening across the supply chain. It's a really powerful tool that can integrate in with a Famous or a Salesforce demand. So that's a solution that I'm really paying a lot of attention to. I think that the other tool that I would really say is, and I think that it doesn't have to be Microsoft, but I think for farms that their accounting systems and their back office, that's actually where I start all my consulting work now. I don't do anything in the field until your office is set up to bring in digital information, until your front office and back office are prepared to have digital data. You can't go do anything in the field. So I also say that the administrative technologies, the accounting types of technologies, those technologies are actually, I think, what should be the priority in the US right now for growers, because they've got to get the mindset of digital into their heads. And when you go straight to field instead of thinking about the administrative processes that are involved in that, it's really challenging.
Sure. Thank you. So, Dr. Dinesh, this question is for you. How can you incorporate Agtech in the education system to encourage youngsters to get involved in this field?
Yeah, this is my favorite area. You see, like I've been professing this since a long period, and I believe that if we really want to see disruption in agriculture industry, we have to take some drastic changes in our entire course curriculum, especially in the countries like developing world or underdeveloped countries. So we have to put various courses within the agriculture undergraduate program at least, and most of these courses should be dedicated to towards agtech or technology part of it, probably machine learning, artificial intelligence, or robotics, or these kind of basic information, and how to use GIS, and then agrometeorology is another area. What we have seen that the technology has come a long way in last 30 years at least, and we are the one from that generation which has witnessed drastic change, right, from evolution of mobile phone to 4G to 5G, and then we see that in next 5-10 years it is going to change much more rapidly what we have seen in the past. So there is a huge immense demand which is going to come in the industry. What we see in the industry that there is a severe lack of right kind of resources who can handle these kind of technologies. When we see that currently in India itself alone, more than 500 startups are there, especially working in agtech area. So we need those kind of people who know the technology as well as who can understand agriculture. So if we have these kind of courses incorporated within our course program, I am sure that somebody must be listening this and try to incorporate these kind of changes in education system, especially in agriculture. So probably my piece of advice will be like, at least for one semester, you should have dedicated courses, or you can have 30 credit hours allocated for these kind of technology courses within the graduation program, apart from other specialized courses and masters. So we need to have those kind of huge manpower resource, especially in emerging economies like India, Africa, and all those.
Very well said. And I think those who listen today, especially the young entrepreneurs, the lessons that the insights that you've been giving has been really important. Working together, having the farmer at the table, along with your technological, innovation, and being financially sustainable and knowing where you are going. To work together to get the product out is really important, is what I learned from you all. And let's wait out the COVID-19 situation, but not to give up, certainly, right? So thank you again. And, Dr. Dinesh, it's probably 1:30 for you, 1:30 a.m. So thank you. And Danny, thank you for your time. And I definitely thank my vendorship team. And for those listeners who are listening, vendorship helps government contracting easy. And actually, there are government RFPs out now in the agtech industry. So if anyone's interested, please reach out to our team to respond to those RFPs. And thank you again. Visit our website. And thank you, Danny. And thank you, Dr. Dinesh. It has been a pleasure. And please do keep in touch.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazira. Bye, Danny. It was a pleasure meeting you all.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.